Virtue. In the noble path of practice, virtue serves as the essential foundation. It provides the fertile soil from which samadhi and wisdom can flourish and bear fruit. Just as a house requires a solid foundation to stand firm against storms, our meditation practice must be built upon good moral conduct. When we maintain moral virtue through our actions, speech, and livelihood, the mind naturally inclines toward contentment. We feel no restlessness born of regret, no anxiety arising from misconduct. This creates the proper conditions for samadhi to develop. With virtue as our base, we can sit in meditation free from the torment of a guilty conscience. As concentration deepens, the mind becomes steady and bright. This clarity of mind is what allows wisdom to arise. We begin to see things as they truly are, free from mental confusion. The interdependent nature of phenomena becomes apparent. We understand directly, through our own experience, how greed, hatred, and delusion cause suffering. But we must remember that practicing wisdom and samadhi without virtue is like trying to fill a leaky pot. No matter how much water we pour in, it cannot be contained. Therefore, we must be vigilant in maintaining our precepts, pure and unblemished. This is the beginning point, the foundation of all progress on the path. Through diligent practice, grounded in virtue, samadhi naturally deepens and wisdom unfolds according to its own nature. These three aspects work together in harmony, each supporting and strengthening the others. Acting in unison, they form the middle way that leads to freedom from suffering. When we speak of moral precepts, we're dealing with something quite practical. They're like the sturdy fences that keep farm animals from wandering onto the road. But here, what we're protecting isn't just physical safety. We're protecting ourselves and others from the harmful actions that spring from an untrained mind. Every action we take, whether it's good or bad, starts in the mind. This is what the Buddha meant by kamma. The results of these actions, what we call vipaka, follow us just as surely as a cart follows the ox that pulls it. I've observed this countless times during my years in Thailand. When someone lacks basic moral restraint, they become an irritant in society. The noble ones, those who have seen the truth of Dhamma, can spot such a person immediately, just as we would notice a rotten mango in a basket of fresh ones. Let me give you a concrete example. In any organization, whether it's a government office, a business, or even a monastery, you'll find that just one or two people who lack moral shame and moral dread can corrupt the whole enterprise. It's rather like finding a cobra in your room. You might think it's sleeping quietly in the corner, but the moment you let your guard down, it strikes. This is why the Buddha called the moral precepts the guardians of the world. They're not abstract principles or mere religious rules. They're practical tools that keep society functioning smoothly, rather like traffic laws prevent accidents on the road. Without them, suspicion and discord can spread like wildfire. I've seen small misunderstandings in villages escalate into serious conflicts simply because people abandoned basic moral principles. For those living in the world, running businesses, raising families, working in offices, and so on, the 5 precepts are absolutely essential. They're not optional choices. Think of them as your passport to trustworthy relationships. When you're established in the precepts, people know they can rely on you. I've known many successful business people in Thailand who attributed their success not to cleverness or connections, but to their unwavering moral standards. When someone who keeps the precepts joins any kind of group, they bring with them an atmosphere of trust. It's quite remarkable how this works. Their reputation for integrity follows them everywhere. This isn't surprising when you think about it. Moral conduct establishes the true quality of a person's character. The moral precepts aren't meant to restrict you so much as they're meant to protect you and others. They're like the banks of a river that guide the water safely to the sea. Without them, the water would spread everywhere, causing damage and eventually drying up without reaching its destination. True moral virtue isn't something that exists separately from our actions. In fact, whenever we act in ways that break the moral precepts, it shows that at that moment, virtue has slipped from our minds. This is a crucial point. While sila manifests through our physical actions and speech, its real home is in the chitta, or the mind. Our outer behavior is rather like a barometer that gauges the state of the mind. When virtue is weak in the mind, our actions become coarse and harmful. But when virtue is strong, when it's truly established in the chitta, then our conduct naturally becomes flawless. There's no effort needed. It flows by itself. When you observe people carefully, you'll see that those who genuinely live with virtue, not just by following rules, but really embodying virtue in their thoughts and actions, they have a special quality about them. It's a kind of nobility that doesn't fade. You can see it in the great teachers, both now and in the Buddha's time. Even ordinary folk who may struggle with their own practice, they recognize this quality immediately. They're drawn to it. When they meet someone who has real virtue, they know it, they feel it. This tells us something profound about the nature of virtue itself. It's not just a human invention or a cultural idea that changes with time. No, the value of sila is that it's part of the natural order, like gravity or the law of karma. It's always relevant, always true, regardless of whether we recognize it or not. That's why the Buddha's teachings on morality are as fresh today as they were 2,500 years ago. They point to something fundamental about the way things are. The basic principles of moral virtue have stood the test of time, not because of tradition or authority, but because they reflect deep truths about the nature of mind and the laws of cause and effect. But it must be understood that we have to work with these principles in our own hearts and minds. That's where real transformation begins. That's where sila becomes a living virtue, not just an idea or a set of rules. The matter of moral virtue requires careful consideration, for its true essence often becomes clouded in people's understanding. Many people mistake mere social customs and traditional observances for genuine moral virtue. These conventions differ widely. What one society holds to be sacred, another may dismiss entirely. Yet beneath these surface variations lies something far more fundamental. When we look deeply into our own experience, we find that genuine moral virtue serves as the bedrock of human dignity. It acts as an inner compass, guiding our thoughts, speech, and actions toward what is genuinely wholesome. Consider what happens when moral standards decline in a society. We need not look far to see examples. The breakdown begins subtly, but accelerates rapidly. With a decline in moral virtue, harmful forces that were previously held in check begin to manifest openly. The society that tolerates such a decline eventually finds itself overwhelmed by the damaging consequences. This is simply the working of cause and effect. There's nothing mysterious about it. The operation of this law becomes strikingly clear when we examine family life. Take the relationship between husband and wife. When moral virtue weakens, trust begins to erode. Suspicion takes root in the mind. Is my spouse faithful? What are they doing when I'm not there? These thoughts are like a poison, destroying peace of mind and creating deep mental scars. The mind becomes constantly agitated, to the point where one can't eat properly, can't sleep properly. Once breaches of moral conduct occur, the damage is devastating and immediate. It's like a broken clay pot. Once broken, it cannot be easily mended. The family unit, which depends on trust and mutual respect, disintegrates. This is why the Buddha emphasized moral virtue as the foundation of all healthy relationships. Some people question whether moral virtue is still relevant in society today. But this shows a fundamental lack of understanding. True moral virtue isn't a set of arbitrary rules or cultural norms. It stems from natural principles, what the Buddha called Dhamma. It doesn't require a formal ceremony or institutional approval. When we develop and maintain qualities like honesty, restraint, and consideration for others, moral virtue naturally manifests in our thoughts and actions. Think of it this way. When we plant rice seeds, rice grows. When we plant thorn bushes, thorns grow. Similarly, when we cultivate wholesome qualities, beneficial results follow naturally. When we act in ways that harm ourselves and others, suffering inevitably follows. This is simply how things work. It's not a matter of belief or tradition. The challenge for each of us is to see this truth clearly for ourselves, not to just accept it on faith. When we understand moral virtue at this basic level, its essential role in human development becomes obvious. This understanding then guides our actions and leads to genuine progress on the path. The development of moral virtue has two main aspects: karmic consequences and karmic actions. The first functions through the natural workings of moral law. Just as fire burns and water flows downhill, so too do wholesome and unwholesome actions bear their corresponding fruits. The second aspect relates our association with those who have developed wisdom, particularly those who have dedicated their lives to spiritual training. Through careful attention to their teachings and determined practice, we gradually emulate them and transform our own conduct. This second path on its own, when followed with sincerity, is sufficient to cultivate genuine moral virtue. When we shape our lives according to the Buddha's teachings, we naturally live in a way that breeds trust and confidence. There is no need for others to harbor suspicion about our conduct in matters of importance. These various levels of moral training act as protective barriers, preventing harmful actions through body and speech. When we understand and observe them properly, they foster harmony in our relationships and bring about genuine peace of mind. Without this foundation, any attempt at spiritual development is bound to meet resistance in the mind. The advantage of moral virtue lies in its simplicity and directness. We need not be scholars or philosophers to understand it. Through steady practice and observation of results in our own lives, its value becomes increasingly clear. This clarity then strengthens our determination to maintain and refine our conduct further. When we look at the Buddha's teaching, we find that he laid down three basic trainings: sila, samadhi, and panya, moral virtue, concentration, and wisdom. These are not separate trainings, but rather different aspects of the same path that work together. Understood in this way, moral virtue lays the groundwork for success in meditation by eliminating the harmful effects created by unwholesome actions of body and speech. Because behavior that leads to tense, stressful relations with others, or a nagging sense of personal remorse, invariably form impediments to basic peace of mind, thus making meditation difficult, if not impossible, to develop properly. Meditation objects or kamatahna, complement moral virtue by acting as solid posts to ground the mind in the present moment. Just as a farmer knows that leaving livestock unconfined inevitably leads to destruction of crops and injury to the animals themselves, we must understand that a mind, without the restraining influence of a meditation object, will invariably create suffering for itself and others. This wandering tendency of the mind persists regardless of one's station in life. Whether you're young and vigorous or advanced in years, wealthy or struggling to make ends meet, highly educated or without formal schooling, living with physical limitations or blessed with robust health, if you lack the right meditation object, your mind remains relatively undeveloped. This condition isn't about intelligence or worldly accomplishments. It's about the fundamental inability to guide the mind toward calm and concentration. Despite whatever external success they might achieve, such people end their lives spiritually impoverished, having never experienced genuine mental well-being. The core problem with an untamed mind lies in its perpetual restlessness. Like a monkey jumping from branch to branch, it cannot remain still even when physically at rest. When the mind lacks the protection of Dhamma, it mistakes momentary sensual gratification for true happiness. But these fleeting pleasures only reinforce its unruly nature. Much like giving sweets to a child throwing a tantrum, it may bring temporary quiet, but ultimately it strengthens the bad behavior. This is why samadhi is so crucial. It stands as a direct antidote to the mind's habitual resistance to discipline. The stability of mind achieved through samadhi is like driving a stake deep into the ground. It provides an anchor point from which all other mental development can proceed. Yet the mind, so long accustomed to its wandering ways, stubbornly rebels against the lifeline that meditation objects offer. This resistance isn't unusual. It's the accumulated result of countless lifetimes of indulging in sensual pleasures and following defilements. Those who truly understand this predicament, this endless wandering through samsara due to an untamed mind, must develop an unwavering commitment to their meditation practice. This isn't a matter of casual interest or sporadic effort. Just as a person whose clothes are on fire would immediately seek to extinguish the flames, one who sees the danger of an untamed mind must apply himself to his chosen meditation object with real urgency and diligence. Every moment spent with the mind properly anchored in its meditation object is a moment of true spiritual progress. Every moment spent in restless distraction is a moment lost to the relentless round of samsara. The Lord Buddha, in his great wisdom and compassion, provided us with 40 meditation objects, each carefully designed to address particular temperaments and mental tendencies. These objects serve as points of focus for a mind that might otherwise be agitated and out of control. Without such firm focus, the mind invariably turns wayward and becomes unsettled. Those living with various physical conditions, those occupying positions of influence, those struggling with daily sustenance, all share this common ailment of an untamed mind when they lack the refuge of a proper meditation practice. Their lives, despite whatever external success they might achieve, inevitably end in spiritual poverty. This is a grave tragedy, for the human birth offers a precious opportunity for liberation that, once squandered, may not present itself again for countless lifetimes. The core problem with an untamed mind, one that hasn't been properly trained through meditation, lies in its perpetual state of agitation. Such a mind constantly seeks satisfaction in sensory experiences. Whatever pleasurable experiences such a mind encounters serve only to reinforce its undisciplined habits. These pleasures strengthen the very tendencies that prevent genuine happiness, thus creating a cycle of increasing dissatisfaction. This is why samadhi, the state of mental calm and stability, stands as such a vital achievement in Buddhist practice. It represents the direct antithesis of the mind's habitual resistance to the remedy for its unruliness, the meditation object. This resistance isn't surprising, for the untamed mind naturally rebels against anything that threatens its long-established patterns of seeking pleasure and avoiding discomfort. Those who genuinely aspire to overcome this deeply rooted mental disturbance must develop unwavering resolution in their practice. This means maintaining steady attention on their chosen meditation object, despite all obstacles. Whether practicing mindfulness of breathing, contemplation of the human body, or any other suitable subject, one must persist with the patience of a skilled physician administering medicine to a resistant patient. The practice requires more than mere mechanical repetition. One must approach it with the understanding that this training directly confronts the mind's most deeply embedded habits. These habits have been reinforced over countless lifetimes, and their roots run deep. Therefore, success in meditation demands not just persistence, but also wisdom in working with the mind's resistant tendencies. Remember that every moment spent with your meditation object is a moment of protection against the mind's destructive tendencies. Each instance of returning to your object helps establish the conditions for genuine happiness. This peace isn't the temporary calm of sensory satisfaction, but rather the profound calm that comes from training the mind to rest in stillness. In this way, the practice of meditation serves as both protection and path, protection from the mind's harmful tendencies, and a path toward its complete liberation. This is the precious opportunity that the Buddha's teaching offers us, and it's our responsibility to make the most of it while we have the chance. The Lord Buddha gave us mindfulness of breathing as a complete method for developing both samadhi and wisdom. It's a straightforward practice, yet it can take us to the deepest levels of meditation if we apply ourselves properly. Begin by sitting in a comfortable position with your back straight. Don't worry too much about posture. Just ensure you're well grounded and alert. Now, bring your attention to the breathing process. You'll notice the breath touches either at the tip of the nose or the upper lip. Choose whichever point feels most distinct to you and keep your attention there. This point of contact is like an anchor for your mind. When thoughts arise, and they certainly will, simply notice them and return to the sensation of breathing. There's no need to force anything. The breath is always there, always present, whether it's gross or subtle. As you continue practicing, something interesting happens. The breath naturally becomes more refined. This is perfectly normal. Don't try to make it happen. Let it occur on its own. You'll find that your attention gradually draws inward, and the breath becomes most apparent in the heart region. This isn't your imagination. It's a natural progression of the practice. Those who have gained some experience can begin directly with attention at the heart, but don't rush this. If you find your mind wandering too much, go back to the nose or upper lip. There's nothing wrong with that. Better to have firm concentration at the nose than scattered attention at the heart. The key throughout is maintaining unbroken awareness. Whether the breath is coarse or fine, long or short, simply know it as it is. Don't try to control the breath. Let it adjust itself naturally. Your job is just to watch and know. Many people use counting or mental notes like in and out when starting. These are useful tools like training wheels on a bicycle. But as your practice deepens, you'll find they become unnecessary. The breath alone becomes sufficient as an object of attention. When concentration becomes strong, you'll notice the mind becomes very bright and clear. This is the mind in its natural state, free from the usual mental clutter. At this stage, even your awareness of the breath becomes very subtle. The mind settles into a state of profound stillness. Don't be concerned if you can barely discern the breath. This is also natural. Simply maintain your awareness. The mind will gradually establish itself in one-pointedness, free from all disturbance. Remember, this isn't something you can force. It comes from patient and consistent practice. If you find yourself struggling, you're probably trying too hard. Just return to basic mindfulness of the breath, moment by moment. That's all that's needed. The advantage of this practice is its simplicity. Whether you're just beginning or have been practicing for years, the method remains the same. Stay with the breath, maintain awareness, and let everything else take care of itself. When one endeavors to establish calm in meditation, there arises a crucial point that many practitioners overlook. While the conventional approach of gently anchoring attention to a meditation object may suffice for many, there exist minds so deeply entangled in their own complexity that this method alone proves inadequate. In such cases, wisdom must be employed as the primary tool, not just as a separate factor in the training, but as the very means of establishing the mind in samadhi. Consider carefully how this shift in emphasis operates in practice. When sitting in meditation, the mind may dart here and there like a willful animal, refusing to be tamed by gentle coaxing alone. This is precisely when wisdom must be brought to bear with full force. One must question, what is the nature of this restlessness? What feeds it? What sustains it? This investigation isn't merely an intellectual analysis. It's a penetrative seeing that cuts through the very roots of mental agitation. The example of an entangled tree serves to illuminate this principle. When a woodcutter encounters a solitary tree standing free in a clearing, his task is straightforward. He need only apply his axe with skill and proper technique. But suppose he encounters a tree thoroughly enmeshed in a network of creepers and vines. No amount of simple cutting will suffice. So he must first examine the pattern of entanglement. He must observe where each vine begins and ends, and how they wrap around and weave through the branches. Only then can he determine where to cut first, second, and so forth, to achieve his aim without creating a tangled mess. Similarly, some minds are so thoroughly enmeshed in mental proliferation that no amount of attention focused on a meditation object will bring about true concentration. The proliferation must be understood at its source. Where does it originate? How does it maintain itself? What conditions support its continuation? This is where wisdom performs its essential function as a practical tool of investigation. When wisdom is properly applied in this way, it acts like a skilled surgeon's knife, precisely severing the bonds of mental distraction one by one. As each entanglement is cut away through clear seeing, the mind naturally begins to settle. This settling isn't forced. It occurs as the inevitable result of removing what previously hindered its progress. The mind then naturally enters into samadhi when those bonds are severed through wisdom. This process reveals a profound truth about the relationship between wisdom and samadhi. While it's commonly taught that training in samadhi must precede the training in wisdom, there exists this alternative path where wisdom leads the way. However, this is not a contradiction of the traditional sequence. Rather, it's a skillful means of establishing that very sequence from a different perspective. Once concentration is established through wisdom's intervention, that concentrated mind then serves as an even more stable foundation for wisdom's further development. Thus, the training continues. each factor strengthening the other, leading onward to deeper understanding. What's crucial to realize here is that mindful awareness is an essential factor in the development of both samadhi and wisdom. When we speak of mindfulness, we must understand it as the faculty that establishes our presence with whatever arises in the mind. Just as a bright light illuminates objects in a dark room, mindfulness illuminates the objects of our attention, whether they're physical or mental, thus making them clear and distinct in our awareness. Without this quality of mindfulness, our experience remains dim and unclear, like trying to examine an object in poor light. This quality of making things clear and distinct is essential for the development of wisdom, because the mind needs the illuminating quality of mindfulness to see things as they truly are. This is why mindfulness is fundamental to all aspects of Buddhist practice. It provides the clear seeing necessary for understanding to arise. Mindfulness serves many purposes beyond what most people imagine. Being aware of this principle is important for meditation practice. When we speak of mindfulness in meditation, we're not just talking about a vague kind of awareness. On the contrary, it's something much more precise and powerful. Consider how mindfulness works when you're contemplating the physical body's true nature, for instance. Many people find this practice unpleasant, but that's precisely the point. Mindfulness here means seeing the body exactly as it is, a collection of body parts that we usually prefer to ignore. You must see it with the same clarity as you'd observe your face in a mirror, not avoiding its blemishes, not pretending it's somehow appealing. Or, when practicing mindfulness of death, you're not merely thinking, "I will die someday." No, you're making death as real in your mind as your next breath. This attitude isn't morbid, it's just realistic. Death could come at any moment, and proper mindfulness means keeping this truth front and center in your awareness. This brings us to a crucial point about the Noble Eightfold Path that many practitioners misunderstand. Mindfulness isn't just one isolated factor in a chain of path factors. Rather, it's like the thread that runs through and binds together all the other factors. When you're developing right intention, mindfulness is there watching, making sure you don't slip back into wrong intention. When you're practicing right speech, mindfulness guards your tongue. Without this constant vigilance, the path will fall apart. Think of it like driving a car. Right view is your map, showing you where to go. Right intention is your decision to follow that map. But mindfulness is your actual awareness while driving. It's watching the road, checking your mirrors, and maintaining your speed. Without this constant attention, your car will crash, no matter how good your map is, or how sincere your intentions are. At the same time, mindfulness on the path must always work hand in hand with right effort. Mindfulness sees what's happening, but effort is what actually makes the changes. When unwholesome thoughts arise, mindfulness spots them, but effort does the work of letting them go. When wholesome qualities are needed, mindfulness recognizes the opportunity, but effort cultivates them. This is why proper mindfulness practice always involves the entire Noble Eightfold Path. Practically, you can't separate them into individual factors. Right view gives you the understanding of what's wholesome and unwholesome. Right intention keeps you pointed toward freedom from suffering. The moral factors, right speech, action, and livelihood, provide the foundation. Without their stabilizing influence, mindfulness becomes aimless, drifting like a boat without a rudder. True mindfulness isn't just about being aware. It's about being aware with purpose, with understanding, and with the commitment to transform your mind. This is how it leads to wisdom, and through wisdom, to the end of all forms of pain and suffering.